They clipped a house staff badge to my sweater at Christmas dinner. Then my own son said, "Food's for family," and pointed me toward the kitchen. I didn't cry. I just set my wedding ring on the table and watched their faces change. Before I go on, let me pause here for a moment. If you're listening quietly, maybe standing where you shouldn't have to stand, I want you to know this. You're not alone. You're welcome to stay with me. Subscribing just means you'll hear the rest of this the way it truly unfolded. Slowly, honestly, without turning away. I used to wake before the house did, not out of discipline, just habit. 71 years teaches your body its own clock. The kettle always clicked off before I reached it. I liked that sound, small, predictable. I'd stand at the counter, one hand resting on the edge, waiting for the ache in my knee to settle. Then I'd pour the water, slow, careful, no spills, no rush. The house stayed quiet in the mornings, too quiet for something that large. Light slipped through tall windows and settled on floors that always looked clean, even when they weren't. Everything seemed arranged, as if it were waiting to be photographed. I wiped the counters anyway. Old instinct. You clean what you live in, even when it doesn't feel like yours. My son's home sat north of the city, behind a gate that opened without asking questions. It hummed when it moved. I remember thinking that sound felt expensive. I lived there 3 years, in what they called the guest suite. It had its own door. That sounded generous at first. Later, I understood it meant separate. I kept my sweaters folded into one drawer, my shoes lined neatly in the closet, toes facing outward, like I might need to leave quickly. I told myself it was temporary. I said that word often. Temporary makes things easier to carry. Daniel had always been ambitious. Even as a boy, he wanted bigger answers than the rest of us. He hated small talk, loved big plans. When he married Lila, everything sped up. Her family moved fast, talked fast, laughed loudly. They knew the names of wines I couldn't pronounce. They planned holidays months in advance. They never asked who would clean up afterward. I didn't mind helping, not at first. I liked folding baby clothes, tiny socks, soft cotton. I liked being needed in quiet ways. Some afternoons, I sat in the nursery chair while my grandson slept, his breath warm against my collarbone. I hummed without realizing it. Old songs my mother used to sing while washing dishes. Those moments felt solid, like something real was still holding me in place. Richard liked the house, the screens, the sound system. He said it felt like we'd finally made it. I didn't argue. After 40 years of building things together, you learn which silences keep the peace. I stayed busy. Grocery lists appeared on the counter. Dry cleaning tags hung from doorknobs. The trash went out before anyone noticed it was full. At night, I sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed lotion into my hands. The skin there had thinned over time, veins closer to the surface now, evidence of years spent doing things quietly. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, fluorescent light, no softness, just a woman who had learned how to disappear without meaning to. Still, there were dinners where we laughed, birthdays with candles, photos taken quickly, before I stepped aside to hold the phone. It felt workable, not warm, but steady. I told myself families change, roles shift, you adapt. I believed that if I stayed useful, I stayed included, that if I didn't ask for much, I wouldn't be in the way. So I kept moving, kept smoothing things over, kept choosing quiet over friction. And for a while, that choice almost looked like peace. Almost. Something in that house was tightening. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough that I started holding my breath without realizing it. And I didn't know it then, but that fragile calm was already thinning. It didn't arrive as a single moment. It came in pieces. Paper was the first thing I noticed. Envelopes that didn't belong to me, thicker than the rest. Cream-colored, no return address. They sat on the sideboard by the front door. I didn't open them. I straightened the stack and left them where they were. Daniel's handwriting had changed over the years. Sharper now, more confident. When I saw it on one envelope, something tightened low in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing. That afternoon, Laya asked me to take the crystal wine glasses from the cabinet. Not the everyday ones. The tall set, she said, already walking away. They're for tonight. Just rinse them. Don't polish. I want them clear. I nodded. My hands did what they'd always done. While I stood at the sink, voices drifted in from the living room. Daniel, Lila's mother. Richard, laughing louder than usual. I wasn't trying to listen. The kitchen was close. Sound travels. It's cleaner this way, Lila's mother said. Once everything's under one name, estate planning is simple. Daniel answered quietly. Dad already signed the preliminary forms. We just need to finalize. There was a pause. Then Richard cleared his throat. She doesn't need to be involved, he said. It'll only confuse her. I set one glass down too hard. It tapped the counter, sharp and out of place. The conversation stopped for a breath. No one came in. A few days later, I went looking for the checkbook. The drawer where it always lived was empty. I checked again. Then another drawer. I found it in the office, locked inside a file cabinet, one I didn't have a key for. That night, while Richard showered, I opened his desk drawer. I hadn't done that in years. It felt intrusive. It also felt necessary. Inside was a manila folder. My name wasn't on it. The documents were familiar. Transfer of authority, management designation. Daniel's name appeared more than once. Mine didn't. The dates were recent. 2 signatures already there. I sat on the edge of the bed with the folder in my lap. The paper felt heavier than it should have. When Richard came out of the bathroom, steam following him, he stopped short. "What's that?" he asked. I held the folder up, didn't open it again. "You signed these," I said. He rubbed his face with a towel. "It's just paperwork." "For what?" I asked. He hesitated. That pause told me more than his answer. "For continuity," he said finally. "Daniel needs room to step in." "Step in where?" I asked. "At the business. At the house. Eventually." Eventually. A word that makes decisions sound gentle. "You didn't tell me," I said. "I was going to," he replied, the way people say it when they don't mean it. Later that week, I overheard Lila on the phone. The laundry room door was half open. I was folding towels. "She'll go along with it," Lila said. "She hates conflict." A pause. "No, it's better this way. Once she's settled somewhere else, it simplifies everything." I folded the towel again. Too tight this time. "She doesn't need all the details," Lila continued. "Richard will handle her." Handle her. That evening, Daniel handed me a printed seating chart. "We're finalizing things for Christmas," he said, "so everyone knows where to sit." My name was there, under a heading I didn't recognize. Support. I looked up at him. He didn't meet my eyes. "It's just logistics," he said quickly, "so the caterers don't get confused." On Christmas morning, the badge was already on the counter. Plastic, black letters, house staff. Leela clipped it onto my sweater with a practiced hand. "For clarity," she said, "just for today." I looked around the room. The table was set. 9 chairs pulled out, one place left empty. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the plan. The house didn't sound the same after that. Not louder, not quieter, just hollow. I moved through the rooms like a guest who'd stayed too long, careful not to touch too much, careful not to leave a trace. The next morning, I folded laundry that wasn't mine, shirts with stiff collars, baby blankets that smelled like powder and something sweet I couldn't name. I stacked everything neatly, clean corners, even edges. No one commented. At breakfast, conversation passed around me. Schedules, appointments, plans. My name never surfaced. I poured coffee and noticed there was only one mug left with a chip on the rim. The others were new, matching. I drank from the chipped one anyway. Some afternoons, I sat in the guest suite with the door closed, listening, footsteps overhead, laughter that didn't include me. I learnt who was home by the sound of the floorboards. Daniel's steps were heavier now, Richard's slower. When they spoke to me, it was practical. "Can you watch him for a bit? Do you know where the receipts are? Did you see my charger?" I answered when asked. I stopped offering. At night, sleep came in fragments. I'd wake and stare at the ceiling fan, counting rotations until my eyes burned. The quiet pressed against my chest. I thought about other homes I'd lived in, smaller ones, louder ones, places where I took up space without asking. I remembered the first apartment Richard and I shared. The radiator clanked all winter. We argued about money and laughed about nothing. Back then, I felt solid, like my presence mattered simply because I was there. That feeling had slipped away so slowly I hadn't noticed when it left. Some days, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and paused. Not because I didn't recognize myself, but because I did. A woman standing still while her life rearranged around her. I wondered how long it had been happening. Not the plans, the shrinking. Invisibility is a quiet thing. No one announces it. They just stop checking if you're in the room. I began eating later, after everyone finished. The kitchen felt different then, quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum. I washed my plate and dried it right away. Didn't want it mixed in with the others. Once I left my sweater on the back of a chair. It was gone when I returned, folded, placed on my bed. A small gesture, a clear message. I sat on the edge of the mattress and held it in my lap. The fabric was warm from the dryer, still smelled like soap. That's when the weight settled. Not anger, not grief, something heavier. The understanding that I could stay forever and still not belong. I stopped trying to remember the last time someone asked what I wanted. The answer felt too far away. Days passed, then another week. No one noticed when I skipped dinner. No one asked why I stopped humming. I started writing lists again, not for groceries, for thoughts. Things that were mine, things that weren't. At the bottom of one page, I wrote a single sentence. No underline, no decoration, just a fact. I began to think, very carefully. I folded the paper and slipped it into my purse. Then I sat back and waited. I didn't hurry after that. That part mattered. I let the days move the way they already were. I answered when someone spoke to me. I followed routines that no longer belonged to me. From the outside, nothing shifted. Fruit still appeared on the counter in the morning. Small clothes were folded and returned to their places. My purse stayed on the same hook by the door, but inside, something had settled into position. I began noticing things without attaching feeling to them. Not curiosity, not hurt, just attention. Which drawers were locked now? Which ones weren't? How often Daniel used words like temporary, and eventually, how Leela spoke in summaries instead of conversations. I noticed Richard no longer brought papers inside. They stayed in the car, or in his office, so I stopped asking. Instead, I listened. Not by standing at doors, not by lingering, just listening when people forgot I was there. That happens more than you'd think. I learnt which days the mail arrived. I noticed whose name appeared on which envelopes. I learnt that important decisions were spoken quietly, and completed ones were discussed out loud. At night, when the house finally went still, I sat at the small desk in my suite. The lamp hummed faintly. I liked that sound. I didn't write letters. I didn't make plans. I sorted. Old documents. Receipts I'd kept without knowing why. Folders I hadn't opened in years. I wasn't searching for leverage. I was looking for clarity. What was mine? What wasn't? Some papers surprised me. Not because they existed, but because they hadn't been taken. A deed. My name alone. An agreement from years back. My signature dated first. Things I had handled quietly, long ago when it was easier to be thorough than loud. I placed them back exactly where they'd always been. Didn't hide them. Didn't move them. Just acknowledged them. During the day, I watched how decisions continued without me. How my absence was assumed instead of noted. I watched how easily people step into space you stop occupying. I didn't interrupt. Silence gives a certain kind of permission. People reveal more when they think you've accepted your role. I let them believe that. When Christmas plans began circulating, I nodded along, didn't volunteer, didn't withdraw. I noticed my name stopped appearing on lists, then reappeared. Under different headings. I didn't react. Reaction invites explanation. Explanation invites negotiation. I wasn't interested in either. Instead, I made one small change. I stopped carrying my phone from room to room, left it on the nightstand more often. If someone needed me, they came looking, and sometimes they didn't. Those moments told me more than any conversation. I paid attention to timing. Who was gone when? Who assumed I would fill the gaps? I made notes in my head, not grudges, notes. One afternoon, I took a walk around the neighborhood, alone. The gate opened. The gate closed. No one asked where I was going. That felt important. I passed houses that all looked alike, lights set on timers, garages closing with the same smooth sound. It struck me then how much of this life ran on assumption, on momentum, on people believing things would remain as they were because they always had. I returned before dinner. No one commented. That night, I sat on the bed with my hands folded in my lap. The room smelled faintly of laundry soap. I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting. I was letting things finish revealing themselves. You don't interrupt a process that's already telling you the truth. You watch it long enough, and it shows you exactly where you stand. By the time Christmas morning arrived, I wasn't bracing myself anymore. I was ready to let them do what they were already doing, and to step aside. At the moment, it mattered most. The dinner began on time. That mattered to them. Candles were lit together. Wine poured in a careful order. Phones placed face down, except when photos were needed. I arrived once everything was already moving. Not early, not late, just present. No one greeted me directly. They didn't need to. The room had already decided where I belonged. Lila moved first. She always did. She crossed the space with a practiced smile and held the badge as if it were nothing more than a label for luggage. Plastic, light, temporary. She clipped it to my sweater without asking. House staff. A few heads turned. Someone laughed, then caught themselves. Daniel looked down at the table. Richard stared into his glass. No one said my name. I stayed where I was for a moment, long enough for the room to register that I wasn't moving. Then I stepped forward, not toward the kitchen, not around the table, straight to the empty place setting. The chair hadn't been pulled out. That detail mattered. I didn't touch it. Instead, I reached for my left hand. The ring slid off easily. It had loosened over the years without my noticing. I placed it on the table, centered between the plate and the glass. The sound it made was small, but everything slowed around it. I unclipped the badge next, set it beside the ring, plastic next to gold, function next to history. Daniel finally looked up. His mouth opened, then closed. Mum, that was all. I adjusted the napkin at the empty seat, folded the edge straight. Old habit. I won't be staying, I said, not loud, not quiet, just enough. I turned and walked out. No one followed. The front door closed behind me with a firm sound. Not slammed, decisive. Outside, the air felt sharper than I expected. Cold enough to wake you up. I stood for a moment with the keys in my hand, listening. Nothing. I drove away without checking my phone. That night, the consequences began quietly. Not arguments, not shouting. Questions. Why was the badge still on the table? Why was the chair empty? Why did the evening feel unfinished? By morning, practical problems surfaced. The house listing appeared online. No announcement, just a fact. Access codes stopped working. Calendars shifted without consultation. When Daniel tried to log into accounts he assumed were his, the screen refused him. When Richard called, the conversation stayed short. "I've handled it," was all I said. Paperwork moved forward because it already had momentum. Signatures dated. Decisions recorded. The store changed hands the way responsible things do. On schedule, with notice, without ceremony. Employees adjusted quickly. They always had. The house entered, showing rotation. Lights on, lights off. Leela stopped posting photos. When Daniel came by the office unannounced, the door was locked, not aggressively, just closed. I didn't watch from a distance. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't require an audience. By the time the sale finalized, they understood what silence means when it's backed by documentation. They stood in the driveway once, papers in hand, voices low, trying to decide what could still be negotiated. Nothing. I collected the last of my things when the house was empty. Rooms echoing. Furniture gone. I found the badge in a kitchen drawer, mixed with pens that didn't work, and menus no one used anymore. I held it for a moment, then set it back, not as evidence, as closure. I moved into a smaller place, 1 table, 4 chairs. On the first night, I pulled one out and sat down. No one assigned me a role. No one corrected my position. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was complete. I've had time to sit with that night, with the badge, with the empty chair, not in anger. That passed quietly, the way weather does when it's done. What stayed was understanding. I can see now that the moment at the table wasn't the beginning. It was the moment things finally stopped pretending. Long before that, I had learned how to make myself smaller, how to smooth edges, how to keep things running by not asking too much. I thought being useful meant being valued. I thought patience would be noticed. I thought silence was a form of love. There's no shame in believing that. Many of us are taught to. But dignity doesn't vanish in one sharp moment. It thins, layer by layer, until one day there's nothing left to give without losing yourself. When the badge was clipped to my sweater, I didn't feel shocked. I felt finished. As if my body understood something my heart had been holding off, that I wasn't being pushed aside in that moment. I had already been set aside. The badge only made it visible, and visibility, even when it hurts, has a strange kind of mercy to it. It tells you where you stand without asking you to guess anymore. I've learnt that respect isn't earned by tolerating less, it's protected by knowing when to step away. Leaving didn't make me cruel. It made me clear. I stopped explaining myself into smaller shapes, stopped waiting for someone to notice what they had already chosen not to see. There's a peace that comes from that kind of ending, not the loud kind, the steady one. I still think about my son, about the choices he made, not with bitterness, just with acceptance. People don't always realize when they trade connection for convenience. They only feel it later, when the room grows quiet and something important is gone. As for me, I've learnt to take my seat only where it's offered freely, and to leave without noise when it isn't. I don't carry the badge as a wound anymore. I carry it as a marker. The moment I stopped confusing endurance with love. You don't have to raise your voice to reclaim yourself. You don't have to explain your worth to people who benefit from forgetting it. Sometimes all it takes is standing still, removing what was never yours to wear, and choosing where you sit next. That isn't victory. It's something quieter. It's peace. If this stayed with you, I invite you to sit with it for a moment. Maybe it reminded you of a time you made yourself smaller, or a moment you realized you didn't have to anymore. If you feel like sharing, you can leave a comment below. There's no right way to say it, only your way. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, told gently and without rushing, you're welcome to subscribe and stay a while. Sometimes it helps just to know someone else understands the quiet parts too.